So you're probably going, Dakota, why are you in a cemetery, if you see behind me, that dates back maybe to the 1830s and doesn't go back to the 1750s where we're currently talking about? Well, I'll explain to you in a minute why we're at this cemetery. But I want to point out over here, when you look down over this hill, where the Indians was going to meet and rendezvous. The two parties, one Captain Jacobs and the other one Shingus. And I crawl under this wire here. But this is the confluence, or the confluence of Sideling Hill Creek, which is what's right below me, if you can see it, and the Little Audric Creek, which is over that way. Okay? And the confluence is over there, where the Indians, according to Hayes Eshelman's research, was camped, and hopefully you can see it through the trees. There's a field over here on this big curve on the Sidling Hill Creek, and on that, in that flat area there where that field is where the Indians encamped Shingus's party with his captives, including Jean Lowry and her 5 children. And they came here and camped right in that area. Now the militia that was falling under Captain Culbertson, 51 men strong from Fort Littleton, came from the direction in which I just walked, which is the what is now the Madensville Cemetery. And at the Madensville Cemetery, they spotted this Indian camp. Now again, the Indians are asleep. According to Jean, there wasn't guards. She was bound along with her children. None of the other captives were, most likely because she was giving the Indians a little bit of a fit. And but they were sleeping here at this Indian camp. Now, it was around dawn when, as they were slumbering at the camp, the militia surrounded the Indian camp and opened fire. And the whole entire woods was engulfed in gunfire and flash pans going off and lights. And the Indians took off on a run, and they all ran into the mountain laurel thickets that were surrounding the camp. And the militia moved in and secured the prisoners. Now, in the whole turmoil of shooting into the Indian camp, there was probably only one Indian actually killed, according to Jean Lowry, and one wounded. But unfortunately, there's reports that she didn't actually report on, but there were reports that Mary McCord, who was one of the captives, was shot by friendly fire in this engagement. But most likely she did die. Now the militia now secured the prisoners, and the unbound Jean Lowry, and they were working on untying her children. But Culbertson, his orders were they need to move to higher ground and secure a better position so they can retreat to Fort Littleton, because now they had the prisoners, they have the Indians on the run. We need to get out of here. So with that order, they removed themselves from the Indian camp down in that lowland right there, and they moved to a higher ground. That is why I am at the Madensville Cemetery. The Madensville Cemetery up here is, of course, on higher ground, and according to Hayes Eshelman's research, this is where the militia moved after regaining their prisoners. In the middle of untying Jean's children, the militia again was positioned up here on this hill, somewhere in the vicinity of this graveyard, this cemetery. And not even 10 minutes after they attacked the Indians at their camp, gunfire broke out. Now again, this is dawn. The sun's just now starting to come up over the mountains. It's still pretty dark. It's covered heavily in trees. It's very forested. And the Indians took the trees, surrounded the militia, not even 10 minutes after the original attack, and they opened fire. The battle that ensued after that is known as the Battle of Sideling Hill, since we are next to the Sidling Hill Creek. The militia and the Indians exchanged volleys of fire behind trees and in undercover for around 2 hours. Sometimes it's been recorded as 2.5 hours, but around 2 hours they fired on each other. And the Indians under Shingas was the one who initially started the circle surrounding the militia. The militia had no way out. They were surrounded. What made matters worse was that Captain Jacobs and his group of around 50 warriors heard the gunshots. And by hearing the gunshots, they came to the aid of Shingas. So now you had reinforcements moving in. You have roughly 51 militia, around 20 captives, surrounded by roughly 100 native warriors firing upon them. And they were surrounded. After 2 hours, the supplies were diminishing. The militia needed a way out. And luckily, recorded by a man named Benjamin Bligh, it turned out that there were 3 young Indian warriors who discharged their rifles at the same time. And that could have been a mistake, because you're supposed to have somebody with a loaded weapon at all times under Indian mode of warfare. So if they were standing there and they all fired at the same time, now they needed to find cover in order to reload, and they had nobody to cover them if they were rushed. So the Indians actually, according to Benjamin Bligh, took off, and by doing so, it opened a hole in the circle that surrounded Culbertson's forces and the captives. Benjamin Bligh says that he actually discharged his rifle, but it didn't go off. He was eventually wounded in the arm, and him, along with the rest of the militia that was left that wasn't killed, or was able to get out of the circle, was able to make their escape. There were 5 captives that made the escape with the militia. That was Mrs. John Thorne and her baby, a little boy, and 2 of Anne McCord's daughters. And they made it safely back to Fort Littleton. Of the 51 men of the militia that was led here by Captain Alexander Culbertson, 21 men were killed. 11 men were wounded. Of the killed was included Captain Alexander Culbertson. Of the wounded, Lieutenant Jameson. But they were able to make, the remainder of the militia was able to make their escape through the circle around them by the 100 Indians that now outnumbered them 2 to 1. They were able to escape and make it to Fort Littleton. They were not able to escape with everybody. Some people who were wounded or was left behind were eventually rushed and taken by the Indians and killed. Most of the captives that were left, including Jean Lowry and her 5 children, were recaptured by the native warriors. So along with Jean Lowry and her 5 children were also other captives that were recaptured from the Battle of Sideling Hill. One was Anne McCord. Another one was a young, I believe, 7-year-old Martha Thorne. And then there were 7 other captives that are unnamed and that history has lost. But they were all recaptured by the Indians, originally captured by Shingas at Fort McCord, and now recaptured at the Battle of Sideling Hill when the militia lost. When the militia lost, the men and everything, there was a 63% casualty rate, meaning that there was 63% of the militia was either killed, wounded, or captured. That is the worst casualty rate by percentage of any battle fought during the French and Indian War in Pennsylvania. Even worse than Braddock's defeat. Even though it was higher in numbers, the casualty rate was higher here than it was at Braddock's defeat when it comes to percentage. And as you can tell, like a lot of the things that I visit, there are no signs. There's nothing here to mark the battle site. Nothing here. The only thing here is basically a 19th century cemetery. That's all is here. But this is the site of the Battle of Sideling Hill, where so many men, 21 of them, lost their lives. The amazing part is you said the militia suffered a 63% casualty rate. The Indians had roughly 100 warriors present, and we don't know for certain how many Indians were killed, wounded in this engagement. None were captured, of course, but the estimate was anywhere between 3 and 17 killed and 21 wounded. That rate is a lot lower than 63%. After being recaptured, the Indians took their captives, Jean Lowry, her 5 children, and the others, and they took them back to the place of where the fire was, which Jean Lowry is referring to in her book as the place where they originally were encamped, and where the original attack took place, where the militia surrounded the Indians and fired upon them at the camp. She was taken there. She was actually clubbed in the head, most likely because she wasn't cooperating or something. I'm not sure what exactly she was doing, but she was a feisty individual, so you only know, or you only can guess. But they clubbed her in the head. She went into a swoon. She was very weak because of it. And they were able to capture a live prisoner, one of the soldiers of the militia, who is now unnamed. We don't know what his name is. But they took them all down. Again, this is in the morning of April 2nd, 1756, because they slept here, and then at dawn is when the militia attacked them. So this would have been in the mid-morning after 2 hours of fighting. They gathered up this poor man, and they tied him to a tree down at the campsite, which I showed you earlier in that what is now a field in the lowlands. And they forced Jean, her children, and all the other captives to sit in front of this man as they tortured him to death. During this torture, which was very common for Indians, especially when they did not like you and they had a little bit of time, they actually did torture a fair amount of people, and there's a lot of accounts by captives telling or talking about these said tortures. But I will let Jean Lowry explain this to you, because I was not there, and the best person to talk to would be Jean Lowry, and her first-hand account goes like this. They brought me about 200 perches back to the fireplace, that I might behold the poor man tortured. Here my trembling soul was in hazard of quitting the body, yet this I was forced by the cruel savages to endure. The glory to God in the highest he enabled beyond all expectations. For being seated before the tree unto which the poor man was bound, I heard him say everything he could think of to excite them to pity and be favorable unto him, at which they only laughed and immediately fell to their dreadful barbarity. First they scalped him alive, and thus made the miserable mortal suffer many deaths in one. But his misery was far from being over. They heated their daggers in the fire and pushed them into the fleshy parts of his body, causing the poor creature to roar in the most pitiful manner, wherewith they seemed quite pleased. They repeated this last torture for 2 hours. He looked most pitifully at me when he saw his life was to be taken away, and begged me to pray unto God for him, that he might receive his soul in mercy and deliver him from the world's misery. When I expected the poor creature had been dead, his body appearing half roasted, and one dismal gore with blood, they loosed him from the tree and cursed him, charging him to run, which to my great surprise he did, several perches. But they pursued and threw their tomahawks in him, which ended his miserable life. It's easier for any considering person to imagine than for me to tell what horror I felt at this inhuman barbarity which I was obliged to behold. His looks, his groans, his shrieks pierced my heart, and I expected to be immediately so used, but God had mercifully ordered otherwise. Jean Lowry. It was in this field today, in which that poor soldier was tortured to death for 2 hours. 2 hours. That's amazing. And Jean Lowry was forced to watch it. Again, she was in a swoon. She was half knocked out because she took a blow to the head, most likely from a rifle butt. And she was most likely fatigued, but she was forced to endure this torture that she had to watch, along with her 5 children, the other 2 captives, or the other 9 captives, I believe, from Fort McCord. They had to sit and watch this man die. During the torture, on top of it, the Indians would throw bloody scalps in front of Jean Lowry's face, and at one point they actually bid her to eat them if she was hungry. Another Indian offered her bread, and then he took the bread away and then threw the scalps in and said, "Eat these." And then on top of it, there was a man named James Blair. He was one of the soldiers in the militia under Culbertson. He was beheaded, and they took his head and they throwed it in Mary McCord's lap, and they also danced it in front and dangled it in front of Jean Lowry's face, and she endured all of that. It was an awful, awful thing to see. About 1 o'clock after the torture, that's when the Indians packed up and they headed west, and they continued to push Jean Lowry and her children further west. She was eventually taken, she was captured by the Indians. She spent 6 weeks under terrible torment. They attempted to drown her. She ran the gauntlet twice. She was beaten constantly. Her children were removed from her and taken into captivity. But she endured. She survived, despite being 6 months pregnant. She was eventually sold into slavery to the French, an indentured servitude as a prisoner of war. And that's where she spent most of her time during the French and Indian War. So I'm going to take you back to the monument now at Fort McCord site. And that monument is the only monument that commemorates the people who were victimized and lost their lives or wounded in the Battle of Sideling Hill and the attack on Fort McCord. Again, here at the battle site, there's no signs to tell you what happened here and tell you the people who died here, and most likely is buried here somewhere. I'll take you back to the actual monument at Fort McCord and tell you the people who are listed on it. So Mary McCord, she was shot by friendly fire during the Battle of Sideling Hill, most likely died from her wounds or murdered by the Indians shortly afterwards when she was recaptured. Mrs. John Thorne and baby, they escaped the Battle of Sidling Hill with the militia and made it safely to Fort Littleton. Mrs. Ann McCord, wife of John McCord, she was taken to the Lenape village of Kittanning as a captive, and she was rescued 5 months later when Colonel Armstrong attacked and destroyed Kittanning on September the 8th, 1756. Ann McCord's 2 daughters, they also escaped the Battle of Sideling Hill with the militia and made it safely to Fort Littleton. Martha Thorne, a 7-year-old girl, was also taken to the Lenape village of Kittanning as a captive, and she was rescued 5 months later when Kittanning was attacked and destroyed. A young mother with unborn babe. According to the Maryland Gazette, this unnamed woman was killed near Fort McCord as it burned. And as I mentioned before, she was killed and scalped, and she was ripped open, and the unborn infant was also scalped. She was most likely initially wounded during the attack on Fort McCord. And then a young girl. According to the Maryland Gazette, this girl was killed and scalped near the base of a nearby mountain near Fort McCord as the Indians made their escape with their captives. The girl was also probably wounded, or initially wounded in the attack, or she was too young to keep up, and they didn't want to keep her around. Now, the names of the Provincial soldiers killed in pursuit of the Indians at Sidling Hill: Captain Alexander Culbertson, John Reynolds, William Kerr, James Blair, He was the one who was beheaded at the battle, and his head was thrown in Anne McCord's lap, and also paraded around in front of Jean. William Denny, Francis Scott, William Boyd, Jacob Painter, Jacob Jones, Robert Kerr, William Chambers, Daniel Moody, James Robertson, who was a tailor, then a James Robinson, who was a weaver, James Peace, John Blair, Henry Jones, John McCarty, John Kelly, and James Louder. The names of the Provincial soldiers wounded in pursuit of the Indians at Sidling Hill: Lieutenant Jameson, Abraham Jones, Francis Campbell, William Reynolds, John Barnett, Benjamin Bligh, John McDonald, Isaac Miller, William Hunter, Matthias Ganshorn, and William Swales. We need to honor these people, for they died for their country and for their neighbors and suffered wounds. And unfortunately, they were unsuccessful in their pursuit of the Indians. They were still should be honored, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows their names. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it entertaining and also educational as well. And hope you have a better understanding of what happened here during the Indian Wars, in the French and Indian War in 1756. We'll see you later.